Hi everybody, thanks for tuning into the channel today. I got a comment from somebody and I said, hey, that's a good idea for a video. And last video I made where I was reviewing this guitar, the Squier Classic Vibe Starcaster, I did a thing where I just mentioned kind of just in passing that I like playing the guitar through a bass amp. And kind of the story behind that, when I was in high school, first learning to play guitar and played with several bands, and I played bass with the high school jazz band, needed to buy a bass amp. One of the things you might wonder, maybe if you're new to guitar, can you play bass through a guitar amp? You can, but you just can't turn it very loud because, number one, the speakers and stuff are designed to bleed off, like open back cabinets, stuff to bleed off bass frequencies. So if you really push the bass, trying to get a good bass sound out of one, then what ends up happening is you can blow the speaker. And they're also they're tuned, the voicing, the controls and stuff are made for guitar frequencies, and they're designed to distort. They're designed to make a pleasing tube type distortion, a good square wave distortion that would then give you the effect that, you know, like you're playing through a tube amp or something, even if it's a solid state amp. And so they're made to not have you know, too much low end in them. Bass amps, on the other hand, are made to have a lot of headroom. In other words, you can really push a bass amp without distortion, and you can get a lot of clean sound. And even though they have a speaker that's tuned for a lower range, and the cabinets are usually closed back cabinets, you get a lot deeper low end, but also the high end comes through well on them too. You also end up with a bass amp. Normally you have something that's like a high mid control. Guitar, if you're lucky, you have treble, bass, and a mid control. On bass, because the mid-range frequencies on the bass are real critical, they usually would have some kind of filter sweep thing where you can highlight a particular frequency and cut and boost it. And so you can really fine-tune your mids to get a really pleasing sound. So playing on an electric guitar, you get a lot of high end. And so it comes through really nice and clean, and the low end's nice and full and rich, and it just sounds really good. Now you can, like I usually, how you get your distortion? Well, I use pedals, or I have like a rack that I use for like in my home studio. I use this rack stuff. That gear is all like 90s vintage gear, so I don't take it out to gig with it anymore. Just it's too fragile to do that with. But I just take a pedal board out, and I'll have like a distortion pedal, compressor, a couple other different effects. But I can get something that sounds pretty good. Let me turn around here a second and pop that on. So if I want to get something that's got some crunch to it. So that sounds great, sounds nice and full. And there I've just dialed my volume back just a little bit so I can get a little bit less. I can tune basically how much. I want to go to my front pickup. Let's see here. Tone. So it gives you a nice pleasing tone with just the pedals. Just depends on what kind of pedals you use. My favorite pedal for distortion is the old, who made the Tech 21 Amp Distortion. You can't find those anymore. They don't make them. You can find them on eBay though, and they're really good. They have a compressor and a distortion circuit with a noise gate in it. So it sounds really good, really clean, and very authentically tube sounding. So I really like the sound of that a lot. But coming through just the plain amp, I'm just going to... Now, another feature that you'll find on bass amps too, some bass amps will give you a distortion control. And this works differently than a guitar amp's distortion control. On a guitar amp, basically what it's doing, you're playing the preamp against the power amp, and you're cranking the preamp to get the distortion to create the square wave, and then you control the overall volume with your master. But what ends up happening with the bass amp, they usually have this kind of cool circuit in there that, because if you crank the distortion too high on the bass and you don't keep some fundamental bass tone in there, some of the clean, the dry tone, then what ends up happening is that you're going to lose the bass end. So you've got to keep some of that sound in there. So a lot of bass amps will have this distortion control that allows you to control how much of the distortion, first of all, how much distortion you generate, and the second is a blend that allows you to blend that with the dry signal. Most fuzz pedals don't allow you to do that, most distortion pedals, and most guitar amps don't allow you to do that. So in this case, I've got like a pretty good dry signal. And the little bit of distortion you're hearing there, the little bit of crunch, is coming from the amp itself. I just have a little bit of it dialed in at the end of the effects, so it gives me this nice tube amp effect. But I've got lots of clean tone in there too, so it does pretty well. So if I'm playing just straight, there's no effects on here right now except for a little bit of spring reverb. So I got lots of high-end sparkle. My front pickup. So punchy low end, nice tight high end, clean tones, a little bit of grind. If I want to pump it up a little bit more on the amp, I can, here's the overdrive level, so I can bump that up. That's just coming from the amp itself, not the pedals. So it's really a nice flexible setup. I'm kind of turning these controls up and down here a little. It's a nice flexible setup that allows you to get a sound. Now, just here in my home studio for rehearsals and stuff, I use the 25 watt acoustic, it's the bass B25C. I'm actually thinking about getting a larger version of this, but I have a much larger bass amp already that's got 160 watts. If I take that to a gig, it makes your pant legs wave in the breeze. And I just hook the pedal board up to it and I get that same kind of sound. But this acoustic one has a really great sound. I love going to rehearsals with this one, so I might just want to get something that's going to be a little more punchy for a gig later on. That's pretty much it. The nice sound of the bass amp. You can play the guitar through the bass amp. You can play the bass through the bass amp, of course, and that's going to sound great. You can't do it the other way around though. You can't take a bass and put it through the guitar amp and get a good kind of sound out of it. So, but if you like good clean sounds, you like to have a good flexibility of your tone and be able to, and then the headroom, of course, this little 25 watt amp, I can crank the living daylights out of this thing and it'll really hold its own because it's got all this headroom. So it stays pretty clean up to a pretty high volume, and then I can just make it break up a little bit with the controls, and I can do stuff like then max it with my pedals and push it over the top. So it works out pretty good. Well, that's all I got for today. Please like, subscribe, and share, and come back and see what we got coming up soon. West out. Bye, guys.